The morning following my chat with Vavi and message to Earth began like any other. After waking up to my new alarm and meandering ponderously through my daily hygiene rituals, I decided to take a look at the news. My informational breakfast was for the most part the usual fare of Providence carnage. Ever since I'd received my earpiece, news segments such as these had become every ounce more informative as they had more disturbing.
Panic this morning throughout Zintral as our closest allies, the Territory Council, are forced to concede their capital city to Providence's invasion force. Despite desperate efforts by our own forces to evacuate civilians, tens, if not hundreds of thousands, remain trapped within the city.
Kekhelo, widely hailed as the city of the future, hosts several major manufacturing plants that have so far been vital to the war effort. Providence's intentions with the city are so far unknown, but given their recent activities throughout the Habit Theater, the people of Zintril have good reason to fear the worst for those still within city bounds.
Minister Salkim has so far neglected to comment on this major blow to the alliance, but military officials have promised a shifting of the winds for this war just over the horizon. Is a turnaround truly in the making for our war to stop Providence's great purification, or is this just a comforting lie touted by our floundering leadership? I am Kazia Perkik, and this has been the War Report.
Hearing once again about the actions of Providence, my thoughts returned to the moment when I'd killed that spy. Part of me worried that my fading sense of guilt for Yisk's death was a sign of growing cynicism, the early onset symptoms of callous disregard for the lives of our enemy. Much as my more logical side insisted that this was not the case, that I was simply moving on from it faster than expected, still, I found myself deeply disquieted by the notion. The next segment of news actually came as an entertaining surprise to me. Photos of my pod taken from the crash site flashed on screen just as they had many weeks prior, around the time I had first landed. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the screen was a caption vaguely readable as "The Suki Farm Incident Explored." Up on screen, another reporter appeared to be standing in a field of grains alongside a dirty feathered farmer.
We're here live on the Suki family farm with Kolvor Suk, family man and former military pilot. Speaking of which, thank you, Kolvor, for your service.
Of course, I enlisted on with the wings soon as I could to fight Providence.
Mr. Soki, on the first dawn of the prior Estria, military authorities released a report on the event regarding the object that crashed onto your land as a failed military prototype. This evidence has since been corroborated by our Prime Minister himself. Many, however, are maintaining speculation regarding the object's true nature.
Oh, this was going to be good.
Indeed, ma'am.
The farmer nodded, shaking his head feathers incredulously.
I actually happen to be one of those speculators.
Could you perhaps give us a description of what you saw?
The reporter asked, holding out the mic to catch his response.
Anything that stuck out to you?
Miss, I was a pilot for the better part of my career life, and never once did I see something like that object. It was massive, about the size of our barn. Had no wings on it either.
Do you think they may have fallen off when it crash landed?
Hearing this, the farmer's expression grew conspiratorial as he leaned in closer to the microphone and began speaking in a hushed tone.
That's the strange thing about it, you see. When I first saw it, certain parts were visibly red hot. It must have fallen a long way. But when I got a closer look to describe it to authorities, the hull was hardly scratched. None of our craft are even half that tough.
So do you have any theories on what this unidentified fallen object could be?
She asked, her voice betraying a slight edge of condescension.
Call me crazy.
The farmer began, glancing about rapidly as though in fear of being watched, on national television no less.
That thing ain't from Archesa.
Are you suggesting it's some sort of meteorite?
The reporter asked, attempting, it seemed, to tease out the farmer's actual theory.
No, it was a vehicle. 64 parts, the CAFL equivalent of a percent represented.
You're saying that you believe it was built by aliens?
The reporter probed further, visibly stifling a chortle at such a ridiculous idea.
I most certainly ain't saying it wasn't.
Unfortunately, I was unable to stick around for the conclusion to this comedy, as right when the talk of aliens began, I was interrupted by a familiarly sequenced knocking at my door.
Andrew?
Vavi's voice called out. Flicking off the television with a disappointed sigh, I stood up and approached my cell's entrance.
Good morning.
My dear friend chirped happily, hardly allowing me an opportunity to return the sentiment before wrapping her claws around my wrist and all but dragging me through the halls. Whoa now, I interjected, digging my heel into the polished aluminum floor to stop Vavi from dragging me any further. What's the rush? I asked, observing with a cheeky smile her newly flushed features.
Chot and the other weapons engineers are absolutely dying to see your prototype in action.
She explained in a hurry, reaffirming her grip upon my hand and attempting once more to drag me along, this time to little avail. Hearing this justification from Vavi brought me no small measure of joy. Narcissistic as it may seem, the novelty in being a constant center of attention had yet to wear off on me by this point. Having aliens be as fascinated by me as I was by them, reasoning aside, could only be described as a dream come true. You could have just told me this, right? I teased, applying not more than a mode of further resistance to spin Vavi backwards into my arms as though we were sharing a dance. Embarrassment softened Vavi's features as she looked down upon me with a soft click of shallow laughter.
Apologies.
She cooed, shaking free from my grip before promptly dusting off the sleeve of her lab coat.
I just got swept up in their energy a bit.
I don't blame you, I affirmed, stretching myself out before making a gesture for her to more gently lead the way. Saw what happened to the Territory Council's capital on the news this morning. I know you guys are excited to finally turn the tides. With this, Vavi's usual pleasant and uplifting presence darkened into something else entirely.
I hope you know what you're doing.
She sighed, looking to me with a newfound deep concern.
Chot told me the production division already has a small division of whitebirds ready for our counterattack. But without something big for the regulars, they won't last long against Providence ground forces.
Oh, don't you worry about that. I chuckled evilly, conjuring within my mind the schematics for this prototype. If my calculations were correct, and they were, I checked, then the force of this prototype would easily breach 3 times that of the CAFL's current models, not to mention its ammunition capacity, which put their own to shame. Squawks and chirps of rapturous enthusiasm echoed through the laboratory as I entered alongside Vavi. Immediately upon my arrival, the mass of engineers excitedly crowded around my design's blueprint broke their formation in order to bombard me with all manner of questions regarding the build.
How old is this design?
Much as I loathe to admit it, I honestly had to think about that one a bit. If you mean this exact model, about 19 hours. If you mean this type of gun in general, then at least 500 years. That response was clearly not what they had expected, as quiet murmurs of speculation regarding our current capabilities floated between individuals.
How ferocious were your wars that something like this was necessary?
Another Kafal asked, momentarily stopping me in my tracks as I contemplated how best to articulate that, by our standards, this thing was little more than a toy. These were never used in a real war, I concluded, breathing a quiet sigh of relief as this half-truth seemingly satisfied them. Eventually, one of the scientists finally gathered together the courage to ask me that question, which they had all been audibly agonizing over.
If this is that old, what sort of military technology do your people have now?
More than enough to make sure you guys win this war. I concluded with an apathetic shrug, hesitant to continue this line of questioning. If the Kafal discovered what it actually took to kill a human, I would probably be classified as some form of bioweapon. Comparing our physiologies simply wasn't fair. They were fragile to us in the same way that we were fragile to hippos. Regardless, who's ready to see how this beauty shoots?
Go on then.
Chot began in a tone of unbefitting excitement.
Show us how it's done.
Boy, would it be fucking awkward if I missed. Newfound anxiety bubbled up in my chest as I carefully unclipped the safety and with slow precision lined up the weapon against the nearest dummy's chest. At this range, with no more than a handful of meters between us, failing to hit my target would be especially embarrassing. And so, steadying myself with a deep breath and lining up the prototype's barrel against my nearest target, I fired. And much to my misplaced surprise, actually hit the target first try. Fractions of a moment after the bullet landed its mark, it had already been apparent to everyone in attendance that it was the work of no ordinary Kaffel gun. Ripples of force centered on the bullet's destination spread across the torso's surface like those of a puddle meeting a raindrop. The real show, however, was what went on beneath the surface. The brunt of my weapon's force appeared to be centered near the ribcage's center right half, thoroughly shattering it and launching the ribs like shrapnel with the full power of a heavyweight's haymaker, sending one inward into the replica heart and another rocketing into its skull. A few of these rib pieces even punctured the surface, startling some of the scientists as one of them clinked against the glass, separating them. The damage compared to their Ricassi carnivore model was a marked improvement, but it was the firing rate and capacity of ammunition that really made this weapon shine. Quickly pointing my weapon at another of the targets, I fired once again and managed to nail it in the head, creating a splash of the gelatinous substance as beneath it the skull ruptured, leaving nothing more than a stump atop the dummy's neck. My third and fourth were unfortunately off the mark by quite a significant degree, but the fifth successfully managed to graze the furthest target after missing my intended one. As expected, the damage was significant. Were this a real Kaffel, their death would be a much less merciful one than my previous two targets. In order to demonstrate the ammunition capacity of this model, I decided that I would demonstrate another feature I had added. Grabbing the barrel's end and twisting it with a loud kerchink, I enabled the 3-round burst setting and began laying into my final target. Behind the glass, Kaffel scientists watched with awe and terror as my successive projectiles proceeded to decimate all that was left of their display, leaving in my wake nothing more than chunks of colored goop and fragments of fake bone on the ground. Needless to say, I pitied whoever would have to clean up this mess.
Amazing.
Chot breathed, looking with awe over the utter devastation left behind by my prototype as he accepted it into his grasp with quavering claws. The subsequent disbelieving gasp as he opened the ammunition compartment was every ounce what I had hoped for.
There's still dozens of rounds in this thing, and you didn't reload once.
This is still nothing compared to a human gun. I admitted quietly enough that only he and Vavi could hear.
What do you mean by that?
Vavi asked with a curious and mildly concerned headshake. I didn't want to go into specifics with every scientist there, but if any two Kaffel deserved to know everything my kind were capable of, it was Vavi and Chot. After this, we can go back to my ship and I'll show you the files on real human weaponry.
Regardless,
My translator continued loudly, speaking with enough volume for everyone to hear.
Andrew, your cooperation so far has been a heaven send to our war effort. I'm going to be going with the convoy delivering this to our prototype manufacturing facility. I hope that in my absence you continue aiding us in our mission to restore peace on Archisa. Friends, I get the feeling this battle is about to face a major turning point.
And judging by the applause that ensued, his feeling was one unanimous.
Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more original content. New chapters and standalone stories uploaded weekly.